Drum layering is a technique used by sound designers to create unique custom drum hits whilst maintaining full control over the entire sound, so things like the punch, transient, etc. Today, we're going to experiment with drum layering and see how we can break it. Like, what are the different ways that we can mess around with the concept of drum layering? Layering the sounds gives you complete control over every different aspect of that hit. For example, this kick has a body layer, a transient, and a kind of acoustic layer on top of it, which sounds like this together. So the first thing I want to look at is phase alignment. So when you're creating a drum hit and layering sounds on top of one another, you have to be very considerate of the phase of those sounds. And what we mean by that is essentially when one wave goes up, the other wave should probably go up too. And they should hit at about the same time. Well, they should hit at the exact same time. It normally matters the most with very similar sounds, so kicks that hit at the exact same pitch would be very important for this. I think the best way to demonstrate what phase alignment does would be to have the same kick played twice on top of one another. When you have two hits like this, when the phase is aligned perfectly, what's actually going to happen is each of the amplitudes of this wave are just going to be doubled because they're both hitting the exact same time. So that still sounds pretty solid. However, if we were to move this second kick, this layer, the phase will start to become out of alignment. And when it's up and down at the same time, that just equals 0. So you just don't have any sound. See how weak that sounds? So that's why phase alignment is so important for two identical or very similar sounds. If they're hitting at the exact same time with the exact same amplitude wave, then it will just be double the sound. If there's any discrepancy between those two waveforms, one hits now, the other hits in just a moment later, then the sound will become much stranger. It'll become a lot weaker because those waveforms are no longer hitting together, they're hitting slightly out of sync. So that's kind of the impetus for this experiment. I want to see, can we intentionally mess up the phase between drum layers and still make it sound good? The strength of the kick drum comes from the low end, and without a nice solid sine wave in the low end, it's just not going to sound like a kick anymore, as you can hear with this. So the only thing that we can really do is make this not a kick. Let's see if we can phase align kick 2 in such a way that we create a different sound, something that's more percussive, not quite a kick drum anymore. I actually think this sounds really interesting. Listen to this, it's sort of like the kick is delayed just a slight bit, which it literally is, but... What if we chop out the low end of this combined sound? That's actually pretty interesting. Let's give that some width. I kind of think that needs a little bit of reverb. I've added a hybrid reverb in the quartz algorithm with just a bit of a blend between the digital algorithm and the real convolution IR. Not super high on the dry wet, and then I boosted up the high end quite a bit, and it gives us this sound. As I was listening to it back, I thought maybe an echo on the layer could be quite interesting. In ping pong mode, if I just sort of play it over and over again for a second. I think I want to sample the bit where the delay comes in. Sounds really sick, but I want the pitch to be a little bit higher. That's it. I think that's our sound for this experiment. Now that sounds cool because we acknowledge the limitations of phase shifting layers for a kick drum. If we'd have tried to keep this as a kick drum, we would have just kept failing. There was no way that we could have a sine wave that low overlapping with another low sine wave. It just disables the speakers, basically. Nothing's coming out of that speaker. It's cancelling every single time the waveform goes up. Second waveform goes up, that cancels itself out. So the only way we could make something cool with that was to embrace something higher end. This second experiment, one thing you might notice with drum layering is every layer tends to be a very atonal sound. So this transient, it's a little like noise layer. The kick itself, it's pretty atonal. It's a typical kick with a pitch envelope that goes up all the way down. And then finally, this layer is a acoustic layer. So all the layers of these drum hits tend to be pretty atonal. So I'm thinking, what happens if we layer a hit with something very tonal? I'm going to use this kick drum, as it's weighty and I think deserves a little bit of tonality. Now I have to decide on what I actually want that tonal layer to be. Is it going to be something organic, like a piano, or something digital, like a synthesizer? I think I'm going to experiment and see what we can end up with, see what feels good with this kick drum. That sounds pretty sick. Oh, well, I haven't tested this enough yet, so I'm going to do another one in just a moment, but just putting a couple piano chords on top of it already sounds really interesting. And one thing that I wasn't thinking of was the fact that if I want to play a different note outside of the one that I sample, which is this one, then not only is the pitch of the piano going to change, but the pitch of the kick is going to change too. Which is actually quite nice because as I get higher and higher in the piano, I want less and less of the low end of that kick. All right, there's our next one. So this is layered with a synth stab on the same note. Well, I had to tune it down a little bit, but it's the same note as the other ones. Now we have these two. And you'll notice that I had to fade in this intro because it was a little harsh. It sounded better without the transient from both things. And then I also rolled off the bottom end of that too. That one was easy. That was a super easy experiment. We just layered something tonal with a kick. We probably would have worked out that that sounded good anyway, but I think the interesting part of that is going to come when we make an actual track out of these sounds a little bit later in the video. For this next one, I want to notice that most of the time layering these drum hits have maybe 3 layers, maybe 4 max. We have the main body, so in this case, this guy here. A transient layer to have some extra punch right at the beginning, usually to cut through a mix. And then some sort of character in the body or tail in the case of a snare. That tends to be the rule that people use, but what if you just kept adding layers? For this one, I have a acoustic snare that I had created using Superior Drummer or something. I'm going to just keep adding layers and see what happens. Is it going to be a complete noisy mess, or are we going to have something interesting? Might be a mess, but we might be able to make something fun out of this. This is how this guy sounds. So this is the mess that we've created. We've added just a ton of layers very indiscriminately. I wanted to just see what happened if I just didn't even think about it and just added layers. And it sounds pretty horrible. I had to put a limiter on the group. I don't know if you can notice that, but there is a bit of phasing happening. If I just play this on its own, notice how punchy that sounds. It sounds really clean to me. But then play it with all the other layers. You lose it. There's some level of phasing happening. You've lost the punch. It sounds really weak. So how might we go about fixing that? I think the best way of doing this is to consider the sound in terms of its transient, body, and tail, and pick and choose the sounds or rework the sounds within the layers to account for the fact that we need those 3 different parts of the sound. So I definitely think this first one is the best transient. But but there may be some things that we can layer on top of it. That's weak, so let's just roll that off. M snare 2, I think if I play that together with this, there's too much phasing. So I'm actually just going to cut that out entirely and bring that in. I should note that when I'm talking about the transient of this, I think I'm talking about there. This is where the sort of 250 hertz punch comes in, and then it becomes much more noisy after that, as you can see by the waveform. So I'm pretty much focusing on this part at a minimum. This one has like no transient. So let's just get rid of that. That one's actually kind of nice. Maybe we just, what if we just grab the transient from this? You know, I think that works. There's no way in hell this is going to be a transient. It's only on one side. So let's just literally cut that out entirely. Then I think we might be good for transient at this point. I think I'm going to cut out everything else. Just leave it to those 2 layers that we identified at the top here. These guys right there. We might focus on the body of the sound next, but I'm actually going to focus on the tail because I want to work out how long I want the sound to be. As you can see, every single one of these layers is slightly different in length. So I'm just going to use the length of this first one to determine how long I want everything else to be and just chop it from there. So to focus on the body of the sound, we'll need to think about that middle section between the start and the tail. I know I said I was going to do the tail next, but I think just chopping off the sound is all I need for right now. So I'm going to think about this body again. And I think this guy might be a problem. Yeah, there's some low end to that we really definitely don't want. This one is super heavy on the bottom end too. Then this one is also very sub heavy. All right, we're definitely getting somewhere. I think the levels of these different layers need to be fixed up a bit. They're definitely sounding a bit loud on some and quiet on the others. In doing that, I've also just noticed that the phase of these two is actually a little bit incorrect. You see how it hits about here, but on this guy, it's hitting all the way back there. So I'm actually going to move this up a tiny bit so they hit a bit more together. All right, I just went through every single sound and changed the volume of it to be in line with this snare acoustic sound, and EQ'd some things, did a little bit of manipulation, mostly EQ stuff to be honest, and that gives us this sound, which I think sounds pretty good, definitely compared to the last sound anyway. So that's a snare drum with 10 layers on top of it. So what happens if you just keep layering? You can make a pretty cool sound. This is, I think, objectively an interesting sound, but it requires a ton of processing and you have to be very specific about what each sound is intending to do. Is it a transient? Is it a body? Is it a tail? Not bad looking waveform, really. Now, the final thing that I want to try, which should be a pretty easy one to implement, is the fact that these layers are designed to make a cohesive sound. We phase align them, we make one be the transient, the body, the tail, etc. And then we bounce it out to have one cohesive sound that we can use within our mix. What if we intentionally made it not cohesive? And this is going to be very easy to experiment with. I'm going to take the transient, the bass, and the body, pan them around, phase them, flange them, whatever, and let's see what happens. Let's start by automatically panning this transient. So the problem with this being a single bar is it's kind of not changing much. So I think I need to make this longer. How's that sound all as one? It's like very minorly disorienting, but not very. I might delay it. Yeah, that sounds odd. It's probably hard to hear if you're not in headphones, but the transient sort of moves around your head. Then for this body layer, why don't we make it be really far back? If the transient's going this way, let's make the body go really far back. We can achieve that pretty easily using reverb. So let's do a massive reverb. That sounds pretty cool. So even with moving the transient around and making the body feel like it's further back, it was quite difficult to make this sound not cohesive, actually. Still sounds pretty solid, and that's probably because the main layer, the kick, still sounds normal. So that actually might be a failed experiment. Anyway, let's take these sounds and put them into a real little track. All right, so I have taken every sound that we have made in those 4 separate experiments, mostly kick drums, 1 snare, and I've put together a beat that I think has come out actually really cool. You're probably going to like it. It's a very sort of glitchy, techie sounding thing. So thank you so much for watching and enjoy the beat.